12,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers carved limestone pillars taller than a house. No pottery, no metal tools, no agriculture, just stone hammers, and something you will see changed everything about how we understand civilization. Because before this site, historians believe temples came after farming. First you grow wheat, then you build monuments. Göbekli Tepe turned that upside down. Someone organized hundreds of workers to haul 50-ton stones across a Turkish plateau before anyone planted a single seed. Who were they? What drove them? And why does almost every answer lead to 12 more questions that scientists still cannot crack? The tell rises 15 meters high and spreads across 8 hectares. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt saw flint tools scattered across a farmer's field and recognized what surveys in 1963 had missed. Those weren't grave markers. Those were the tops of megaliths buried for millennia. Schmidt started digging in 1995. What emerged rewrote prehistory. 20 circular enclosures, nearly 200 T-shaped pillars. Some standing 5.5 meters tall, some weighing 8 to 10 metric tons. The oldest radiocarbon date from enclosure D came back 9,530 BCE. That is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. 7,000 years before the pyramids, and every single structure was built by people who supposedly lived in small nomadic bands hunting gazelles with flint-tipped spears. If you value documented archaeological evidence and factual prehistoric history like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. Also, this script is researched and factual, using sources from the German Archaeological Institute's Tepe Telegrams project, published through 2025, Science Advances Journal's Modified Skull Analysis from 2017, and the Cambridge Archaeological Journal's Geometric Planning Study from May 2020, showing equilateral triangle construction patterns across 3 enclosures. Now back to the information. Hunter-gatherers built the world's first monumental architecture. The bone assemblages tell the story. 100,000 fragments recovered across the site. Gazelles, red deer, wild boars, aurochs, not a single domesticated animal. Not one cultivated grain. The earliest evidence of farmed wheat in the region dates to around 8,400 BCE at Novalachori, 40 kilometers west. Göbekli Tepe's oldest structures predate that by more than 1,000 years. The flint tools match other pre-pottery Neolithic sites across the northern Levant. Over 3,000 stone implements found in the first full excavation season in 1996. Cores, blades, burins, scrapers, projectile points. More than 7,000 grinding stones for processing wild cereals. But 0 cooking hearths in the main enclosures, 0 refuse pits, 0 trash heaps, 0 houses with sleeping platforms or storage. Schmidt believed nomadic groups converged at intervals for rituals and feasts. Recent excavations complicated that view. Rectangular buildings on the slope show domestic features, rainwater cisterns carved into bedrock, fire installations, cereal processing residue. A 2025 report in Greek Reporter confirmed archaeologists now see evidence that people stayed for extended periods. But the question splits researchers. Lee Clare from the German Archaeological Institute published findings in Archaeology magazine's May-June 2021 issue, arguing Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning of agriculture. It was the last stand of hunter-gatherers resisting the farming life spreading through the flatlands. All the carvings emphasize wild and dangerous animals: lions, snakes, scorpions, spiders, no bulls, no female animals. No fertility imagery that marks later Neolithic settlements. Then around 8,200 BCE, occupation stopped completely. No gradual adoption of goats or sheep. They just vanished. How does a society with no permanent settlements organize labor for construction projects, requiring hundreds of participants? The logistics alone stagger understanding. Indonesian ethnographic records from 1917 document 525 men hauling a 4 cubic meter megalith 3 kilometers in 3 days using wooden sledges. That number was not purely functional. Rituals demanded witnesses. The stone transport itself became ceremony. Göbekli Tepe's largest pillar measures 7 meters long, 1.5 meters thick, and weighs around 50 metric tons. The quarry sits on the western plateau edge, 500 meters away at most. 100 meters at best. Workers carved channels into limestone bedrock using flint picks. They chose locations where the stone layer matched the desired thickness. When they reached the fault line, wooden beams and wedges lifted pieces free. Modern experiments suggest 7 to 14 people could move pillars using ropes and lubricants, water or animal fat, reducing friction. But carving took immense time. Using Thor Heyerdahl's Moai experiments as reference, one T-shaped pillar would require 20 people a year to carve and 50 to 75 people a week to transport 15 kilometers. Göbekli Tepe has nearly 200 pillars confirmed through geophysical surveys. Multiply those numbers. 20 people per pillar for a year. That is 4,000 person-years of carving alone. Then transportation. Then installation. Then the decorative work. The animals carved in relief. The abstract symbols. The polishing of surfaces. Multiple decades of continuous labor minimum. Gazelles dominated. Over 90% of identified species. Hunting parties ranged across territories bringing game back. Wild cereal processing on scales, requiring those 7,000 grinding stones. The effort to sustain construction crews rivaled the construction itself. And if these groups were mobile, coming and going seasonally, coordination becomes even more complex. Who maintained the site between gatherings? Who protected unfinished work? Who remembered the geometric plans across years or decades? The social structure required to accomplish this rivals any agricultural society. Yet no agriculture existed. The contradiction cannot be resolved with current evidence. We know they did it. We cannot explain how. Enclosure D suffered a massive landslide at the end of the early pre-pottery Neolithic B around 9000 BCE. The structure flooded with rubble from domestic buildings, sediments, burials, and midden deposits. Repairs followed. Terrace walls went up in building phase 5 to prevent future damage. They failed. A second major landslide during building phase 6 forced abandonment around the late 9th millennium BCE. The other enclosures show intentional backfilling. Schmidt originally proposed ritual closure. Each generation buried the old circles and built new ones in concentric rings inside the older structures. The pattern repeats across multiple enclosures. Build, use, bury. Build again on top. Recent debate challenges this interpretation. A May 2025 article in Mystery Lores cited geological experts noting flood mud evidence, erosion, slope slides, natural processes burying structures over time, but the counter-arguments hold weight. Göbekli Tepe sits at the highest point of the Gürmuş mountain range, elevation 760 meters above sea level, hilltops shed sediment. They do not accumulate it. Wind and rain erode high places. Valleys and lowlands collect deposits. If nature buried this complex over centuries, it contradicts fundamental geological principles about erosion and deposition patterns. The fill material itself suggests human activity, not random accumulation, but deliberate packing. Limestone fragments matching the pillar material, animal bones from butchering, broken stone tools. The detritus of human occupation mixed with construction debris. Someone organized the filling, someone chose what went into each layer. The pillars remained vertical under tons of weight because the fill supported them. Careful placement prevented collapse. This level of engineering implies purpose, preservation for future generations possibly, or ritual decommissioning when beliefs shifted, or protection of sacred ground from those who might desecrate it unknowingly. The emotional experience of ending connection to locations that held meaning. Burying Göbekli Tepe's enclosures could represent grief, confusion, the violence of endings. A loved one dies, a belief system changes, a romance ends, a house burns. The psychological need to tie up place in memory by physically withdrawing from it. The burial becomes poetic object language, communicating through action what cannot be spoken. Why did they leave? Why seal it? Did catastrophe force departure? Did climate change make the region uninhabitable? Or did new ways of life emerging in the valleys make the old hilltop gatherings obsolete? Every enclosure buried carries that unanswered question. Why in something that clearly mattered so profoundly? A vulture spreads wings above. A headless man crouches at the bottom with an erect phallus, snakes, 8 shaped symbols, wild birds, 3 basket-like shapes along the top. In July 2024, Martin Sweatman from the University of Edinburgh published findings in the journal Time and Mind, arguing these carvings represent the world's oldest lunisolar calendar. The V-shaped symbols on the pillar could represent days in a solar calendar, 12 lunar months plus 11 epagomenal days. He cross-checked this with computer simulations of the solar system around 10,950 BCE. The scorpion matches Scorpius. The vulture could represent Cygnus or Sagittarius. The ball above the vulture's wing might be the sun during summer solstice. The Younger Dryas mini-ice age began 12,900 years ago and lasted over 1,200 years. Temperatures plummeted. Ice sheets advanced. Multiple species of large animals vanished from North America and Eurasia. Mammoths. Mastodons. Giant ground sloths. The megafauna extinction coincides with climate collapse. Debate rages over whether a comet, airburst, or impact swarm triggered the cooling, or whether other factors caused it. Evidence includes nanodiamonds, magnetic spherules, and platinum anomalies in sediment layers dating to the Younger Dryas boundary. But not all scientists accept the impact hypothesis. Alternative explanations include volcanic activity, ocean current disruptions, or atmospheric changes. The The Scorpion is Scorpius rising in the summer solstice sky around 10,950 BCE. The position matches within decades of the Younger Dryas onset. The vulture with outstretched wing holding a sphere could represent the Taurid meteor stream, the source of comet fragments, 27 days of celestial fire, the headless man symbolizing death and destruction, mass casualties, civilizations disrupted, the cataclysm that reshaped the world, and the people at Göbekli Tepe remembered. They carved the memory into stone. They created a monument warning future generations or honoring those who perished. Critics from the German Archaeological Institute point out significant problems. The headless man has an emphasized phallus. Death symbols do not usually include erections. Life force and fertility imagery contradict annihilation themes. Jens Notroff noted reliefs on both narrow sides of Pillar 43 went uncommented in Sweatman's analysis. Additional animals, more H symbols, context that might change interpretation, the iconography might tell multiple stories layered together. Sky burial and excarnation practices, seasonal astronomical markers for solstices and equinoxes, constellation maps used for navigation or timekeeping, death rituals preparing souls for passage to the afterlife. All valid interpretations supported by different evidence, but none explain why this specific imagery appears here and nowhere else in such concentrated detail. The pillar holds answers. We just cannot agree on which questions it answers, or whether it answers one question or many simultaneously. Hands positioned near the belly region. Belts wrapped around the waist section where shaft meets top. Some pillars wear loincloths covering what would be genitals. The T-shape itself mimics a human body. Shaft as torso and legs. Top as head and shoulders, but no faces. No eyes carved into the stone, no mouths, no noses, no individual features distinguishing one pillar from another. The anonymity seems deliberate. These are not portraits of specific individuals. They represent something more universal. Schmidt suggested they represent ancestors, revered dead watching over the living, or gods. Spiritual beings without individual names like the Anuna deities of later Sumerian belief. Primordial forces given form in stone. In enclosure D, the central pair measures 5.5 meters tall and weighs 8 to 10 metric tons each. They face each other across the circular space like sentries, standing guard, like divine guardians presiding over rituals, or like deities witnessing gatherings and receiving offerings. The surrounding smaller pillars, typically 4 meters tall, form an audience, a congregation of stone beings participating in whatever occurred within the sacred circle. Anatolian hieroglyphs from the Bronze Age, thousands of years after Göbekli Tepe's abandonment, include symbols that match carvings found on the pillars. The H shape appears prominently on pillar belts. In Luwian script used around 2000 BCE, the H symbol carries meaning as gate or portal, a passage between realms. The crescent H crescent combination carved on Pillar 18's belt translates in Anatolian hieroglyphs as God. The word for divine being. Robert Schoch and Mario Saifzadeh argued in a 2019 paper published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration that this represents the world's first known written word. Not just symbolism, but actual linguistic encoding. God. A being controlling passage from life to death and death to rebirth, from earth to sky and back again, from material existence to spiritual realm. The H symbol might simplify the concept of a divine gateway or cosmic portal. If this interpretation holds, if the H truly means God or gate, then the pillars were not just markers or monuments, they were gods themselves, stone embodiments of cosmic forces, physical manifestations of spiritual beings. And the people who carved them understood symbolism complex enough to encode multi-layered meaning, meaning that would survive 12 millennia buried in darkness, meaning that we can recognize today even without understanding completely. The connection between shape and significance persists across time. The pillars speak. We simply struggle to hear clearly what they say. Gil Hockley and Avi Gopher from Tel Aviv University use computer algorithms to analyze architectural planning patterns. Published in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal in May 2020, their findings revealed an equilateral triangle. Connecting 3 main enclosures, draw lines through the center points of enclosures A, B, and D. The alignment achieves near-perfect geometric accuracy. The largest enclosure, enclosure D, with its 30-meter diameter, sits at the northern apex of this triangle. Significantly, enclosure D is the only one where central pillars carry explicit anthropomorphic carvings with arms and belts clearly visible. This positioning suggests intentional hierarchy. Humans represented at the apex, animals emphasized at the other 2 points, a cosmological statement carved into the landscape itself. Planning this triangular layout required sophisticated geometric knowledge far beyond simple estimation. Rope, stretched to precise lengths, could create the necessary measurements. But maintaining accuracy across hundreds of meters of uneven terrain demands understanding of geometric principles. Measurements had to be repeated, angles verified, center points established before construction began. Coordination between work teams building separate enclosures simultaneously or across multiple seasons. Someone held the master plan. Someone ensured each enclosure aligned with the others according to the geometric template. That person or group possessed knowledge we associate with trained specialists in settled civilizations, not with mobile hunter-gatherers. After agriculture created food surpluses, after settled life allowed specialization, after priests or architects had time to develop abstract mathematical concepts and apply them to construction. Göbekli Tepe predates all those developments by millennia. Hunter-gatherers with no written language plotted structures using equilateral triangles. They understood spatial relationships abstractly. They knew how to translate mental vision into physical reality across vast scales. They coordinated effort over time to maintain geometric precision, even as individual workers changed. Hockley told Live Science that building one enclosure represents a large project requiring significant resources. Planning 3 enclosures together as a unified geometric complex means access to substantial working power and organizational energy. Centralized authority directing labor, specialists holding technical knowledge. The complexity implies top-down organization rather than egalitarian cooperation. Someone commanded, others obeyed. Or perhaps religious authority motivated voluntary participation. Build for the gods, construct the cosmic pattern in stone, follow the sacred geometry revealed through shamanic vision or astronomical observation. The motivation remains unclear, but the result demonstrates capability historians did not believe existed in pre-agricultural societies. Perhaps carved on portable stones or wooden boards, planning documents that could be referenced during construction. No such artifacts have been found at Göbekli Tepe. But without some form of external plan representation, how did builders separated by years or decades maintain geometric precision? How did they know where to position each pillar to maintain the triangle's proportions? Oral tradition passing measurements through generations seems insufficient for this level of accuracy. The geometry is visible today in the ruins. The method that produced it remains invisible, another question without answer. No intact burials exist despite extensive death imagery. 691 fragmented human bones recovered across multiple excavation seasons, scattered through fill deposits, mixed with animal remains on enclosure floors. Found in adjacent areas around the main structures, but not a single complete skeleton, not one articulated burial with body intact. The fragmentation appears deliberate, bones separated from bodies, skulls removed from postcrania. 3 skulls recovered show extensive modifications that cannot be mistaken for natural damage. Deep grooves carved along the back of each skull, precisely placed. One skull has a drilled perforation at the left parietal bone. The drilling went completely through, creating a hole for suspension. The study represents the first osteological evidence of mortuary practices at Göbekli Tepe. The carvings served functional purpose. They allowed cords to suspend the skulls for display. Ethnographic examples from the Naga people in India show identical cord placement patterns. Grooves on prominent parts of the facial skeleton, grooves on the back of the head. The positions prevent cords from slipping on the rounded bone surfaces. The skulls could hang like frames, like trophies, like honored ancestors watching over the living. The practice represents a new variation of skull cult previously unknown from contemporaneous sites across Anatolia and the Levant. Vultures dominate the bird remains recovered at the site, scavenging corvids filling the assemblage, species associated with death and carrion consumption in multiple ancient cultures across the Near East. The combination of vulture carvings on pillars, headless human figures in relief, and modified skulls with suspension grooves suggests complex funerary rituals centered on excarnation, sky burial, bodies exposed to elements and scavengers, flesh consumed by birds, bones cleaned naturally, then secondary burial or skull retention. Klaus Schmidt speculated Göbekli Tepe functioned as a burial ground or death cult center. The positioning offers views across the Heron Plain, the dead looking out over a hunter's dream, prime territory for game, the place where earth meets sky. Why carve grooves specifically for display? The ritual sophistication indicated by skull modification suggests beliefs about death, afterlife, and ancestral presence. Perhaps the skull retained the essence of the deceased, the seat of consciousness. The part that mattered for continued interaction with the living, display skulls could serve as intermediaries. Ancestors consulted for guidance, dead participating in rituals even after flesh departed. The vulnerability of decomposition resolved through preservation of the most sacred element. Associated with burial rites, Çatalhöyük, 300 kilometers west, practiced elaborate skull cult between 7,400 and 6,000 BCE. adult burials positioned under house floors on the north side of living spaces. Sometimes marked by aurochs, skulls mounted above, often accompanied by vulture paintings showing headless corpses. But Çatalhöyük dates 3,000 years after Göbekli Tepe's founding. Did the practice originate at Göbekli Tepe and spread west over millennia? Did both sites independently develop similar death rituals in response to shared beliefs about the afterlife? Without intact burials, without more complete skeletal evidence, we reconstruct funeral practices from fragments and educated guesses. The modified skulls prove something significant occurred. They cannot reveal everything that happened or why it mattered so profoundly that people carved stone monuments to accompany the rites. Enclosure A emphasizes snakes carved in relief and full sculpture, serpents coiling across pillars. Enclosure B showcases foxes prominently, multiple fox reliefs on central pillars. Fox remains repeatedly discovered during excavation. Enclosure C highlights boars, wild pig imagery dominating the iconography. Enclosure D displays birds with special emphasis, vultures, cranes, ducks, waterfowl of various species. This pattern cannot be coincidental. 4 enclosures. 4 animal emphases. The distribution suggests different groups built different circles, clan animals, totems, emblematic signs marking collective identity. Jens Notroff and Oliver Dietrich from the German Archaeological Institute published iconographic analysis in August 2016, noting these variations across the site. If mobile hunter-gatherer bands gathered at Göbekli Tepe at intervals for ceremonies and construction, each might build an enclosure representing their group. Fox people contributing the fox circle, snake people creating the serpent sanctuary, boar people raising the pig pillars, bird people dedicating the avian enclosure. The stone circles become communal gathering spaces with assigned meanings understood by all participants. Territory marked not by physical boundaries, but by symbolic representation. This is our place, our ancestors, our spirit guides watching over us. Animals, spirit guides, protective beings, ancestors believed to take animal form after death. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe do not show hunting scenes despite being built by hunters. No wounded animals pierced by spears. No humans attacking prey in coordinated drives. No depictions of the kill that provided sustenance. The animals appear powerful in their own right. Aggressive postures, male characteristics emphasized, predators rather than food sources. Schmidt and zoo archaeologist Joris Peters argued these were not dietary animals. Gazelles provided most of the meat consumed, over 90% of bone assemblage. Yet gazelles rarely appear carved on pillars. Instead, lions, scorpions, spiders. Snakes, creatures that inspire fear or awe rather than hunger. The choice was absolutely deliberate. Pilgrimage destinations where specific clans gathered for their rites. But why include dangerous animals specifically? Why not depict the aurochs or deer that sustained communities through harsh seasons? Why emphasize predators and venomous creatures? Perhaps danger conveyed power. The ability to face scorpions or snakes without fear marked spiritual strength. Or perhaps these animals represented forces beyond human control, unpredictable, deadly, worthy of respect and propitiation. The symbolism transcends simple representation. It encodes layers of meaning we struggle to decode without linguistic keys, without myths explaining why the fox mattered to one group, why another revered snakes. What stories they told about boars or birds, the animals remain. The narratives vanished with the people who carved them. It is the single best way to support this work. Also, this research draws from the Tepe Telegram's blog, maintained by the German Archaeological Institute team, which published detailed iconographic analysis from excavations through October 2024, and from peer-reviewed findings in Mediterranean archaeology and archaeometry, Journal Examining Astronomical Correlations, published July 2024. Now, back to the information. The site predates agriculture by over a millennium, creating a causation paradox. Wild einkorn wheat grows naturally in the Karakada Mountains, 20 kilometers northeast of Göbekli Tepe. Genetic DNA analysis, published in Science Journal in November 1997 by Manfred Huhn and collaborators, identified this specific region as the primary domestication center for einkorn wheat, one of humanity's first cultivated grains. Radiocarbon dates from multiple sites show cultivation beginning around 8000 BCE, perhaps slightly earlier at 8400 BCE. Göbekli Tepe's earliest structures date to 9600 BCE based on organic material and wall fill. Some researchers suggest occupation or initial construction might extend back to 9800 BCE or even earlier. That creates a gap of 1600 years minimum, possibly 2,000 years between when people built the first enclosures and when people in the region began deliberately planting crops. The Neolithic Revolution supposedly followed a clear sequence. First, humans discovered agriculture through intentional cultivation. Second, surplus food allowed people to settle in permanent locations. Third, settled life enabled social stratification and specialization. Fourth, specialists included priests and architects who then built monumental structures. Fifth, temples and palaces arose, housing emerging religious and political hierarchies. Civilization flowed from the plow. Göbekli Tepe reverses the entire sequence. Monuments first, settlement ambiguous, agriculture clearly after. The logic historians relied upon for decades collapses. The construction itself drove agricultural development. Think about the logistics. Feeding hundreds of workers during festivals and intensive building seasons required unprecedented food procurement efforts. Hunting parties ranging across vast territories, bringing game from distant ranges back to the site. Wild cereal processing on massive scales using those 7,000 grinding stones recovered from excavations. Gathering wild plants to supplement meat, coordinating food supply for potentially months of continuous activity. Over time, that pressure would incentivize cultivation, managing wild grain stands to ensure productivity. Eventually, selecting seeds from the best plants, replanting to increase yields, gradually transitioning from exploitation of wild resources to deliberate management to full domestication. From hunting migratory herds to driving them into specific areas to corralling them seasonally to eventually keeping them permanently, the need to support ritual gatherings and construction projects pushed societies toward farming. Not the other way around. Religion drove economy rather than economy enabling religion. Harvesting grain and plant residues suggesting sophisticated food processing. But critically, direct evidence of cereal cultivation at Göbekli Tepe itself remains absent. The grains processed were wild types. Natural varieties collected from stands growing without human intervention. The animals butchered were hunted game, not herded livestock. If religion and communal ritual drove the eventual shift to agriculture, Göbekli Tepe stands at the exact pivot point. The place where spirituality demanded a new way of life, where feeding the gods or feeding those who served the gods required innovations that transformed human existence. Agriculture might have emerged not from necessity born of climate change or population pressure, but from devotion. The desire to maintain sacred practices requiring food surplus led to the techniques that produced that surplus. Cause and effect entangled in ways that defy simple linear narratives. Celestial events. The torrid meteor stream lasting 27 days, emanating from Aquarius and Pisces. A calendar tracking lunar months and solar years. Precession of the equinoxes. Sweatman claims this predates Hipparchus by 10,000 years. The summer solstice constellation around 9,600 BCE was Scorpius. The sun would rise in that sign on the longest day. Pillar 43 encodes this, the scorpion below the horizon, the vulture as Cygnus, or the Milky Way. The ball representing the sun, or a decapitated head, or both simultaneously. Out that archaeological interpretation requires context. Iconography does not equal astronomy. Animals might represent totems. Symbols might mean multiple things. The crescent and H symbols could denote gods, gateways, seasons, or cosmic forces without necessarily mapping to star charts. But the repeated appearance of specific animals in positions that align with constellation patterns is compelling. The precision of the geometry, the orientation of enclosures, the careful placement of pillars. If the builders tracked celestial movements, that knowledge level transforms our understanding. Hunter-gatherers supposedly lacked the time and resources for sophisticated astronomy. Göbekli Tepe suggests otherwise. Carved near animal figures, positioned with crescents and circles. Interpretations range wildly. Some researchers see Orion, others propose gates between realms. Turkish rug motifs use similar H and I symbols meaning marriage, unity, family, motherhood, birth. Proto-Turkish culture called the I symbol On, meaning cosmos. Chinese tradition uses I to represent shamans or spirit intermediaries. Luwian hieroglyphs translate H as gate or portal. Combined with crescents, it signifies God. Shamanic belief holds, Earth receives life force from sky through a navel cord. Göbekli Tepe in Turkish means belly hill. Göbek means navel. The site has cosmic navel connecting above and below, life and death, material and spiritual. The H composed of two T-shapes, each T representing half in the spiritual world. The symbol becomes a bridge, a passage, a meeting point where realms intersect. But without written records, without linguistic descendants, every interpretation remains speculative. The H recurs across pillars. It clearly held meaning. But which meaning? Multiple layers might coexist: functional, symbolic, cosmological. Linguistic: we see the symbol, we guess at the story. Possibly more than 200 pillars waiting underground. Dr. Mehmet Onal from Heron University estimated 150 years to uncover the entire site. One enclosure might date to 15,000 years ago, older than anything currently exposed. What will those structures reveal? Earlier construction techniques, different iconography, evidence of an even older cultural layer? The protected area under the steel and wood shelter covers the main excavation zone. Beyond that, the plateau stretches across 8 hectares, layers of human activity stacked over millennia. Phase 1 dates to 9,600 to 9,000 BCE, the circular enclosures with massive central pillars. Phase 2, from 9,000 to 8,000 BCE, shows smaller rectangular buildings, less monumental, more domestic. Then abandonment around 8,200 BCE. Later periods showed traces of activity, medieval ceramics, Ottoman-era disturbances, farmers breaking pillars mistaken for ordinary rocks. Each time someone digs, the site rewrites its own story. Recent excavations found a painted boar statue in Enclosure D. Red, white and black pigment residues. The first painted sculpture from the pre-pottery Neolithic A period. Measurements: 1.35 meters wide, 0.7 meters tall. Tusks, tongue, depictions of human heads. Archaeologists suggest creation around 8,700 BCE, slightly later than initial occupation, but still within the site's active use period. At neighboring Karahan Tepe, 40 kilometers east, researchers found a 2.3 meter tall human statue, realistic facial expression, holding a phallus in both hands, fixed to a bench. If Göbekli Tepe connects to a network of similar sites across the Taş Tepeler region, each new discovery compounds the mystery. How did these groups communicate, share designs, coordinate symbolism? The Stone Hills project identifies 9 sites spanning 200 kilometers, all featuring T-shaped pillars, all dating to the pre-pottery Neolithic, all built by hunter-gatherers before farming. The cultural continuity is undeniable. The mechanism behind it remains unknown. A communal feasting location, a calendar monument, an astronomical observatory. Every label fits some evidence. None fits all evidence. No definitive answer exists. Rami Haddad noted in recent scholarship that the interpretation of Göbekli Tepe as a regional ceremonial center where nomadic populations converged is giving way to a more complex vision. Ritual and profane functions coexist. Discovery of domestic buildings and water harvesting systems forces revision of the temple narrative, but the scale and artistry argue against purely practical use. Feasting remains show gazelle and aurochs bones, cut marks, splintering from butchering and cooking. Beer brewing from wild grasses might have occurred. Schmidt believed festivals brought groups together, shared meals, shared rituals, shared labor building the next enclosure. Over generations, this strengthened social bonds and cultural identity. But festivals do not require 50-ton megaliths. Villages celebrate without carving limestone pillars. The investment here exceeds utilitarian needs. Something profound drove construction. Religious fervor, cosmological understanding, fear of the catastrophe recorded on Pillar 43, hope for rebirth after death, all of the above simultaneously. Tristan Carter from McMaster University cautioned that single-purpose interpretations miss nuance. Göbekli Tepe might have served different functions across its 1,500-year lifespan. Early phases focused on one activity. Later phases shifted emphasis. Different enclosures hosted different rituals. The fox circle for one ceremony, the snake circle for another. The diversity of animal iconography supports multiple simultaneous purposes. And the deliberate burial suggests closure, not abandonment, but intentional ending, sealing the past to move forward, or preserving sacred ground against future desecration. The final act at Göbekli Tepe might have been the most meaningful. Covering the stones ensured they would endure, waiting in darkness for 12,000 years, until a German archaeologist recognized flint tools and started digging. He spent 2 decades excavating Göbekli Tepe, transforming a dismissed survey site into one of the most important archaeological discoveries in human history. His vision and persistence brought the world's attention to a site that challenged fundamental assumptions. Work continues under the direction of Necmi Karl from Istanbul University and Lee Clare from the German Archaeological Institute. Each excavation season brings new findings. Each finding generates new questions, proliferating faster than answers emerge. The site will not give up its secrets easily or quickly, and ground-penetrating radar images show enclosures still buried. Structures undisturbed since the day they were filled with rubble thousands of years ago. What will they contain? More pillars with undeciphered symbols combining familiar and unknown elements? Evidence linking Göbekli Tepe to other Stone Hill sites and elaborate regional networks, Proof of astronomical observations more sophisticated than current interpretations suggest? Writing systems predating known scripts by millennia? Belief structures so different from anything we know that we cannot even frame appropriate questions? Humans 12,000 years ago were not primitive in any meaningful sense. They understood geometry well enough to lay out equilateral triangles across hundreds of meters of terrain. They tracked celestial cycles with precision, suggesting calendar systems and astronomical knowledge. They organized labor on scales, requiring sophisticated leadership, communication, and planning hierarchies. They created art rich enough to communicate complex ideas across 12 millennia. They built monuments to forces greater than themselves, expressing cosmic understanding through stone and symbol. And they accomplished all of this before agriculture, before cities, before writing, before metallurgy, before pottery, before the wheel, before everything historians once considered prerequisites for civilization. If hunter-gatherers could accomplish this, what else did they achieve that left no trace? What knowledge vanished when those groups disappeared around 8,200 BCE? What stories did they tell while carving vultures and scorpions into limestone pillars beneath starlight on a hilltop overlooking the Heron Plain? In 1994, Mahmut Yildiz guided Klaus Schmidt to a hill his family owned. Farmers had plowed the field for generations, clearing stones, planting crops, living off land that concealed wonders beneath their feet. Local tradition considered the place sacred. Kurdish names for the hill referenced wishes or miracles, but no one understood what lay beneath topsoil and accumulated sediment. Schmidt started excavating in 1995. The first T-shaped pillar emerged from earth, then another, then dozens over subsequent seasons. By 2006, after more than a decade of work, Schmidt reached his stunning conclusion. These were not graves. These were not homes or storage facilities or defensive structures. These were special enclosures built by mobile hunter-gatherers for purposes we still debate. Communities without permanent settlements somehow mobilized resources, organized labor, sustained workers, and created the oldest monumental architecture on Earth. The discovery challenged every assumption about prehistoric social organization built up over centuries of archaeological study. It questioned the narrative that agriculture enabled civilization. It demonstrated beyond doubt that spirituality and symbolic thinking preceded settled life, that humans built temples before they built villages, that the sacred mattered more than the practical in driving social evolution. In 2018, UNESCO designated Göbekli Tepe a World Heritage Site, recognizing it officially as one of the first manifestations of human-made monumental architecture anywhere on the planet. Turkey and the European Union invested 600,000 euros building a 4,000 square meter protective shelter, steel beams and wooden panels covering exposed structures, preserving them from weather and erosion for future study and future generations. The site now receives thousands of visitors annually from around the world, standing where ancient peoples once stood 12,000 years ago. Looking at pillars, ancient peoples carved with stone tools and dedication. Imagining ceremonies ancient peoples performed under stars arranged differently than today, but we will never truly know. We interpret through our own cultural lens colored by modern assumptions. We project meaning onto symbols that might mean something entirely different, or nothing at all, or everything we guess, and more layered together in ways we cannot untangle. A 2025 discovery at Göbekli Tepe, another Taj Tepeler site in the region, revealed structures potentially older than Göbekli Tepe. Excavations led by Professor Douglas Baird from University of Liverpool uncovered buildings with smaller pillars, not T-shaped like Göbekli Tepe, a different architectural tradition suggesting earlier experimentation, multiple stages of development before the standardized T-pillar design emerged. Baird suggested this site predates much of what has been excavated at Göbekli Tepe. The timeline keeps pushing back further into prehistory. The complexity keeps increasing with each new excavation. Every answer spawns 3 more mysteries. And 90% of Göbekli Tepe remains underground still, waiting in darkness, sealed intentionally, preserved exactly as it was the day construction stopped and burial began around 8,200 BCE. The final mystery is this specific assemblage, a limestone plate carved with severed heads found near Pillar 31 in Enclosure D during excavations. Human faces or masks, 3 of them arranged in a row. Positioned on what might represent a pedestal or ceremonial altar, the painted boar statue, discovered in the same enclosure during 2023 excavations, rests on a decorated base showing multiple symbolic elements, H symbols repeated. A crescent moon, 2 snakes coiling, 3 human faces or masks matching the limestone plate. The connection between decapitated heads, animal guardians, and portal symbols repeats across multiple contexts, death and passage intertwined. Earth and sky connected, Human and animal boundaries crossed deliberately. Realms separated by normal experience but joined through ritual. The sculptors who created these objects left us clues. Intricate, deliberate, preserved in stone resistant to decay. But they left no key. No Rosetta Stone explaining what each symbol means independently and in combination. No text translating their visual language into ours. No mythology recorded explaining the narratives behind the imagery. A reminder that civilizations rise, flourishing, and then vanish completely. Knowledge accumulates over generations, and then disappears when cultures collapse or transform. People who built wonders leave only ruins behind them. And those ruins whisper questions across 12,000 years that we struggle to hear clearly, much less answer definitively. Who carved these pillars with such care and skill? Why did they bury them deliberately instead of abandoning them to natural decay? What did the symbols mean to the people who carved them and the people who gathered to see them? Where did the builders go when occupation ceased so abruptly around 8,200 BCE? When will we excavate the rest of the 16 enclosures still buried? How did hunter-gatherers without agriculture or permanent settlements accomplish something this ambitious and sophisticated? 12 mysteries corresponding to 12 millennia, 12,000 years separating us from them. And 90% still buried under Turkish soil accumulating secrets, waiting for the next excavation season decades from now, waiting for the next interpretation that might resolve old questions or raise new ones, waiting for us to understand what they already knew somewhere deep in their being, that humans are capable of far more than mere survival, that spirituality drives creation more powerfully than necessity, that monuments built with devotion outlast empires built with armies, and that some stories survive only in stone, waiting patiently for someone to learn their language and hear what they have been saying all along.